name is Claire DeBreer. I'm the current chair of the Urban Land Institute's District Council, although this program is part of the Verde Exchange program, not part of Future Build. Thank you for coming. Today we're going to talk about parking, and we're going to talk about it from the context of, A, what do we do with the parking structures that currently exist, and how do we, so we're going to have an open conversation, so if you come down to the front, it makes it a lot easier. So we're going to talk about what do we do with existing parking structures and how do we fix them, or can they be fixed and repurposed into something else? 2, how do we build new parking structures so that they can be repurposed in the future because we think that they will need to be? 3, how do we convince government that we don't need to build as much parking and as many parking structures as we have been? And then how do we make our parking structures that we are building more efficient, and what kind of technologies can we use to make them more efficient? Lastly, we're going to talk about what the shared economies and what autonomous cars, that impact is going to have on parking structures. But we're going to do it a little differently. I may pose questions. These guys are all going to jump in. They are gladly going to interrupt each other. And what we'd like for you to feel comfortable doing is, instead of holding the questions to the end, we're going to just ask you to raise your hands. If we're talking about something and you have a question, this is a small enough group that that's a manageable thing to do. So we'd love to have you just raise your hands and ask the question and be part of the conversation. So first thing we're going to do is have all of our panelists introduce themselves. And then the first question is going to be for Wally, because he's done something wonderfully amazing and innovative. So Anna, let's start with you.
Sure. Anna Lasso. I'm currently the general manager of Exposition Park. We're a state park, actually, and we're part of the California Natural Resources Agency.
Rob Jernigan, and I'm with Gensler, and we're a design firm.
And my name is Wally Marks. I'm part of a 3-generation real estate company with holdings in West Los Angeles.
And I'm Yehudi Gaffin, better known as Gaff. Founded a project management firm 30 years ago and also have a development firm that's about 25 years old.
So Wally, tell us about the parking structure that you've built at the Helms Bakery project, and why it is a parking structure right now for employees only.
Okay. So for those, I'm on the border of LA and Culver City on Venice Boulevard. How many know or been to the Helms Bakery? A lot. Good. Super. Terrific. So this past year I got my C of O on a 200-car parking system that's above ground. It's not on the screen. And it's 200 cars, and it's automated, fully automated, 3-dimensional, if you will. It's the first one. It's the second one technically in the city. The first one's for 16 cars as a test, but ours is the first large scale. Santa Monica and West Hollywood also have ones, different technologies. Mine is truly rack and rail. It's a Disneyland ride, basically, but it's fixed guide rail. And I did it because I had a need. I had to build more parking. I'm projecting more growth, more demand, and I wasn't going to build a concrete structure. Land's extremely expensive, and for me, 20 years is nothing, so I'm looking at long-term horizon. The reason, Claire, that you asked about why is it not open to the public, I think that's really what you had said, and why it's for tenants, was simply that automated parking today is about throughput and how fast one gets in and out of the systems. Much like pumping your own gas or ATMs, it took a long learning curve, and it needs for the same people to use it every single day. But by doing this, and it's up in the air, I've freed more surface parking for the patrons. So that was a quick and dirty answer.
Okay, there was a comment about it's maybe not something that if you haven't done it before, so if I'm fumbling around and I've never done it before, first time I've been to Helms, trying to figure out how to use it, that is the cog in the machine. That's what can
Right,
really...
it's queuing theory. I mean, we just, people are if it's frustrated. So they don't want to wait. It's like, you're leaving a shopping center, and now we're all employees of Westfield because we pay for our own parking there, right? So but someone's fumbling with their credit card, and how many times have I've done? It's like, let me just pay for that. Let's go. We want to get going. And I need to avoid that because I need to have good confidence. And 98% of the time, and it's only been up 6 months, it's gone very well. And my tenants are thrilled. They use it every day. Some only use it in the morning at night, and some are using it 4 or 5 times a day in and out. And it learns your behavior, et cetera. There's a whole efficiency to it, and I'm really thrilled I did it.
So Rob, Gensler has an international book of work.
Yes.
Where have you seen these types of structures done before? How often? Who's beating the U.S. and California to the punch at getting these done? And where have you seen it most successfully done?
Most successfully, we've seen it done in Europe, Claire. And I think Asia is not ready for it yet, frankly. I mean, who made the system, Wally, that you...
The Midwest came out of the auto industry.
Yeah. I think what Wally's done is really great, and I think what's great about it was, one, that he named it Wally World, which caused me to go see it. But no, but it's he also realizes that it has to have a second life, right? And when we talked about what if the autonomous car, what if these issues, what are you going to do? And I think his point is he really looks at it because it's rack and rail. His ability to take anything, whether it's a car, whether it's a container, frankly, I told him maybe it could be officing, and literally move it up and around and do things with it. I think this is something that could be really interesting, and will have a second and maybe a third life, because I think, what we're really advocating for and what we're really seeing is this automobile thing has gotten completely out of hand, okay? And just real quick, and then I'll stop, but in LA, they say there's anywhere from 12 to 15 parking spaces per car. In Houston, Texas, they say there's 30. They say there's as much as Delaware and Rhode Island and Connecticut could cover it with parking for the amount of parking we have in the United States. We get 5% efficiency out of our cars. In the United States, it's interesting compared to Asia, housing's first, transportation's second. In Asia, housing's first, education's second. Transportation's about 5th in the top 10 for that. So we've gotten way out of hand with 5% utilization, making these huge investments in automobiles, and it's got to change.
And talking about the reuse of structures, so we have office buildings that have been going into some of the parking structures that have been abandoned. We've got storage units. Where have you seen some, and this is actually open to any of you, where have you seen some good adaptive reuse done of existing parking structures?
Yeah, we are planning, Seaport San Diego, which is 1.5 million square feet of space, 2,200 parking spaces, all underground below the water table. The spaces are going to cost us right now about $60,000 a space. Our project will not break ground for at least 4 years. So I'm a firm believer that within the next 4 years, parking codes are going to change. So what we have done in our structure is design it as high bay parking, very similar to what Wally and Rob are talking about, where there's an internal system, and we're looking at robotics and stackers to see which one works best. But we truly believe it's going to change over the next 4 years. I think technology is going to evolve. But we're designing that space to be able to take makers' spaces, gymnasiums, theaters, art galleries, storage, restaurants, and it goes on and on. So the space is extremely expensive to build out. We don't know what's going to happen to parking, but we're definitely designing it to be adaptable for future uses.
And,
If I could just
yeah.
interject, but so our system's on pallets, and there's no humans. As much as I want to say I'm a job creator, there is no labor here. That was crucial for me. So the life I have, that I see is if in 5 or 10 years the demand for parking is reduced at the bakery because people are doing ride hailing, I'm right by the expo station, etc., I can turn these into storage units, and tenants can then store an 8 by 20 box, put a pot on it, or perhaps in the evenings, it might be a storage. We believe in trying to get 18, 20 hours of use of our assets. So maybe other people are parking there at night, like ride-hailing cars, or AV cars might be parking there because they got to go somewhere, and they don't want to be in Riverside, they want to be closer to the users. And we could easily be a hub that is then sourcing that, and it's a new revenue source between midnight and 6 in the morning. So that's how I see it being adaptive, what you sort of insinuated, Ron.
Right, and at Exposition Park, we have all flat lots. We have about 6,200 spaces. Thankfully, about 1,500 of those spaces are going to go underground, and we're going to regain 13 acres of open space because the Lucas Museum of Narrative Art is going to build on the west edge of the park. But the southern edge of the park still will have about 1,400 spaces on flat lots. And what we do, it's a little cliche and it's not high tech, but we program those parking lots all year long with events. And whether it's concerts or fairs or community events, we're trying to find uses, because really when we see the park full of cars, it's for an event that happens at the Coliseum that brings in 70,000 people. But we try to find better uses so that those lots aren't just underutilized and empty.
But so, to answer real quick, and the Savannah School of Art and Design actually has done a study, and we did a study along with them, and we actually created modular housing units that would actually fit in a parking stall, and they actually built that in Atlanta, Georgia. So there's been a lot of studying on it. I think the thing that everybody has to understand is a couple things. First of all, as we get more and more efficient with office buildings, and we're getting square foot per person down to about 150 square feet, the brokers are coming along and they're saying, well, we want 4, 5, 6 cars per thousand.
8 to 1?
8. But it's 6 cars per thousand, okay? At 333 square foot per car, which you can't really hit. 350s on an open parking structure. Below a building parking structure, you're north of 400. But at 333 square foot per car, the parking structure is now twice the size of the office building. And so if you're sitting here building a structure that's twice the size, and you're doing it right now because you're trying to get it financed, and you're saying this is what the market wants today, but 5 years from today, I might have something twice the size of the office building that I don't know what to do with. And so what we're doing, as Gav said, we're making taller floor-to-floors, we're getting rid of sloped ramps that you park on, and we're doing speed ramps, and we're designing these structures so they can be converted. So we're doing podiums on our office buildings, and you may have a 6-story podium and a 9-story office building, and then 3 years from now, maybe it's a 10-story office building and a 5-story podium, and you work your way down and slowly convert that parking to office.
Well, one thing, and then we'll take, if I had built a conventional structure, I was only able to go 45 feet in height. Building a conventional ramped structure in my 12,000 square foot footprint, I would have done 130 cars. And I was able to do 200, which is 50% more, in the same envelope.
And that's
Because-
critical.
Right, because my floor-to-floors are only 7 feet, as opposed to typically 10, because there's no people, and cars are this close.
And drive aisles are gone.
There's no aisles, and all the cars are, and there's about 25 eco-friendly things about what we've done, and it's, it's here for the long term. What's
Go
it?
ahead.
It's a gumball machine for cars.
Oh,
Yeah.
Billy.
So what's been the political response from cities and counties to some of this innovative idea?
I'm going to argue that the issue really isn't so much political. I think it's still more finance.
It's
I
definitely
think
coming
right
from
now
your
the big
lenders.
issue is not if, but it's when. And so the reality is, what everybody's really worried about, if I finance this thing and for some reason this developer wants to flip it in 3 or 4 years, can they, if I park it differently? So I think the city recognizes, at least Los Angeles, recognizes that it's a challenge and they'll work with you. So we did have a client came in, this isn't finalized yet, Billy, but they said, look, what if we agreed to put a bond of Uber vouchers? What if we agreed to put out X amount of money for ride sharing? Because it's cheaper, because this developer's saying, I'm gonna bet on 5 to 6 years that there will be the autonomous car, and it's cheaper for me to pay for a lot of my tenants to ride share, just Uber to work. I'll bring you to work and everything back, than pay for the parking below grade.
Before we get to the next question, really quickly, Rob, you shared a story that Genzer did a study, and it was, if you live within 8 miles of your office, it costs
Well,
less.
We
What was
weren't that
it?
smart, but our employees were. And they came to us and they said, do you realize if you live within an 8-mile radius of the office, given what the parking costs are, given the fuel, the insurance, this, that, and the other, that families that have 2 cars will sell the 1 car and actually Uber to work every day and save money. And so I think as we go to autonomous, because 70% of the cost of Uber is the driver, once you eliminate that driver, if that cost is dropped by half, now all of a sudden 8 miles turns to 16 miles. And so all of a sudden, that's why I think we're all going to be ride sharing very
Which
soon.
then goes back to Wally's comment that, and we had talked about this for Exposition Park as well, any place where you have this excess parking that can be used to basically park those autonomous cars while they're waiting to be called, you end up having a whole second use to your structure. Yes?
I think
Or-
it was, quick comment and a question. Comment, I'm mother of 2 millennials, neither of whom own cars. No plans to ever own one. And one's born. You live on the East Coast. I live on the East Coast. My question is, this is gonna sound like a naive question. I have a tiny little Chevy, electric Chevy. I pay the same amount to park my car as the F-150 pickup truck. So I'm just curious if there's any future of parking structures that will either, prioritize or have a cost differential to actually incentivize some of these smaller, more efficient cars.
I mean, we haven't gone there with our policy in the park, but we do have different prices for large, for small vans and vehicles, and I could see as more folks drive their electric vehicles, us looking at some kind of incentive to bring electric vehicles into the park. And another idea that we floated is having a hub for electric vehicles. We're right in the center of LA, but when we think about where you have electric vehicle power stations, there aren't many in that sector on the 110 freeway. Could Exposition Park have a joint partnership with one of the utility companies and have a hub for cars to come in, charge, and then move on promoting electric vehicles?
I don't see any private owners differentiating between an F-150 and a Chevy Volt.
Well, because you,
2 of my cars will fit into the same.
No, no, it won't, no, it won't.
If I can just,
Well, if you added my car and my 1972 Mini Cooper,
There we go.
those would both fit into one car.
Gav, go
if
ahead,
I
and
can
then
just
we'll get to
echo
George.
what Rob said, that the limitation is not the agencies that are approving the parking, it's the risk that financial entities that finance the projects and developers will take to have something that they sure will sustain. Our project's going to be there for 100 years. So part of the risk is how can you assure that you're not creating a problem that's going to essentially create a liability for the project long term?
But if you walked up to someone even 3-4 years ago and said, let's really look at 100% valet or valet assist, and they start to look at a long-term operation cost and this, that, and the other, they're like, and people just prefer, I'll just pay for the parking. Today, most of our clients are saying, no, I want to talk about that, because they really believe a different solution. Even if you don't believe in autonomous, you have to believe in ride sharing. Because I think one of the big things that I've noticed is I used to say, I'm going to go see Billy, or I'll run down to City Hall, pay to park there once.
Yeah.
And you're going, it's cheaper
Hell
for me to
no.
take an Uber back and forth than it is to park. I mean, I paid for parking the other day on the west side. It was $30 for an hour and a half. Right? All of a sudden, you're going, at these costs, it's cheaper for me to ride share.
Well, incentives are always the way to be. I mean, people vote with their pocketbook. When it comes to developers, people lead and developers follow. Not many developers are going to take the leap to do things. So it's people, as in representative government, but most owners, if you're building even at a TOD and you're incentivized to take 50% of your parking off, today at least, they're not going to do it. They don't want to be, they're not risk takers,
But
believe
it's
it or
also,
not.
I think that also, not to interrupt, but that also, I mean, intentionally to interrupt.
Yeah.
As a developer, that is exactly what Rob said, which is, even if we want to, we will go and sell that like hell to our equity partners and our lenders, and they won't.
Right.
So, but
They
let me-
won't let it happen. That's the problem.
Yeah.
So let me ask Billy a question. Okay?
Maybe
The
we
biggest-
could say why you're asking Billy the
Well,
question.
we're going to.
You
Oh,
might
I'm
want to say who
sorry.
Billy is, because we know,
Well,
but
so Billy, what is, I mean, your title? Billy to me is just the most amazing woman in the world because she drove a motorcycle to Solvang, not Solvang, to Sturgis. Oh my. But Billy, come on, you were with Arnold Schwarzenegger, the governor for years. Billy's, yeah.
been involved with both state
Yeah.
and local government.
But when you actually look at right now, one of the biggest issues with our new metro is there's not enough parking. And why, when you think about first mile and last mile? And I would like to believe that the city's recognized, instead of us getting into the parking business, let's let the private sector take that risk. And if the parking sector is building more parking than anybody believes they're going to need, but they're having to build it because of financing reasons, then there's going to be excess of parking down the road. So let's let them take it on versus the city take it on. Maybe?
So we
Yeah,
have,
so my question is, so you mentioned the tension of kind of having to develop for now and what our rules are and the demands are now, and kind of designing for the future and future proofing, and parking is like the quintessential example of that, right? And so we're talking about adaptive reuse or potential future uses of parking structures if we don't need them. That would suggest that we probably want to be putting our parking above ground now, right?
It's cheaper.
So I'm just curious, when you're a developer, you're representing a developer, you're designing a project, you're in the concept phase, you're trying to figure out what this project is going to be. What are those conversations right now about, no, we don't want to go, and of course it's more expensive, like you said, to go underground, but like, what are those conversations and what has been the kind of, I guess, feedback or the dialogue on both sides that right now, thinking about where it's going to be?
well, I
So
think-
maybe I can, so ours is pretty site-specific. So we're on the bay in San Diego. It's on Port Tidelands. It's a 66-year lease. The Port of San Diego currently has their offices in a 1930s building on the Tidelands. So part of the strategies we're exploring is, what if we moved the port offices to our site, put them in an office building which activates our site, and what if we took their site, which is in a less desirable location, used the money we were going to build underground parking and rather build a parking reservoir for more than just our project, but for all of downtown and the waterfront. In addition to that, there's a very innovative last mile, as Rob was talking about, a proposal in San Diego to build a gondola system, which is an above ground, pretty green, low impact, low footprint system that would go in a full circle from Balboa Park to the water, along the waterfront to the airport and back to Balboa Park. So we are offering to actually use some of the money we would put into the underground structure, which is significant, to actually help seed fund that in addition to the parking reservoir.
So let me jump in. Two different projects, two different solutions, but I think one thing you have to remember, in California with an entitlement process that's, let's say, 18 months, and a design construction, we'll call it 3.5 years just to get to 5 years. First thing you're doing is you're guessing, where are we going to be in 5 years? So one client was doing a project in downtown, came in and said 3 levels below grade and X above, and we said, let's take it to 2, let's valet. We believe we can get, and we proved to him we can get more cars in 2 levels 100% valeted than 3 levels non-valeted. And he said, I'll go there because I realize I'm probably going to have more below grade than I need, and I don't want to pay for the 3rd level, because everybody needs to understand the first level is about 30,000, well, 45,000 installed, then it gets to about 60, then it gets to about 80. So it gets incrementally more expensive the further down you go. The other one is actually Building and Safety came to us and said, what's up with you guys at Gensler? You're designing all these parking podiums above ground and putting buildings on them. And we said, exactly. Now, the issue is, with the whole deal is, you have to add higher live load for the office than for the parking. Believe it or not, cars are light. And then you're going to have to probably skin it. So what happens is, if you believe you're going to dump a lot of this parking in 4 or 5 years after you build the building, understanding that's probably 3 or 4 years from now, then they'll go for it. if you don't believe it and you think you're gonna have to hold the building for 10 years and keep it as parking, the incremental cost that you're putting into that garage to convert it, most won't go there. So it's all everything, it's not an if, it's a when issue that everybody's playing with.
And Rob, I would say you ought to, if our system, the one we built, is ideal for valet, because the car can be dropped off at a location, and then the crew runs it through the system very, very quickly. And then the cars are parked below ground in 2 levels, very tight, 50% more cars probably than you can conventionally. And like you said, the cars are probably sitting there for hours.
And the other nice thing about your system, if in fact you find yourself 10 years from now that you don't need to park that many cars, you can take half of your system out, you can leave half of it in. Now I've got tall floor-to-floor space, and I can convert that, and I know this is gonna sound scary, everybody says, but if I can punch a hole or 2 in the floor, everybody says, who would take that basement space? And to be honest, the tech people love it. Biggest problem we have is we put too many windows in buildings for the tech people.
Anna?
So my lens isn't as a developer, but it's as a landowner and the land manager. And I think for me, the real value lies in data and understanding all the tenants on the campus and understanding how they use the parking and what they need the parking for. And I think coming on this, being on this panel, I learned something that Wally said in our conversation earlier is you're always going to have staff that have to be there every day. And so building parking, or if we build any long-term infrastructure, having enough spaces for staff. And then I think in a couple of years to 10 years from now, people will be ride sharing to events or to like the massive events. We already see it now with millennials not even parking at the park. They either take metro or they ride share. So it's really understanding what number of spaces do we need just to keep daily operations going. And then, of course, we can tinker with agreements as amendments happen to figure out how much we invest in actual parking stalls.
You know, I would say just one other thing. I would do hybrids at this point for the next so many years, that some of it's automated. Let's say you're building a shopping center, so the automated's going to the employees and the conventional parking's going for the patrons. And it's a good way to go. I mean, it's not all or nothing.
Let's just talk cost for a second. So Wally, you said that while you got 50% more spaces in the same amount of land, that in the envelope, the construction cost, not the all-in cost, but the construction cost, there was a definite premium to
Sure.
build this structure over another structure. About what do you think that premium is?
Well, keep in mind, the first one through the wall is always the bloodiest, so please keep that in mind. You know, and it was a year later, and we redesigned it halfway through because we found different ways to be efficient. And if I could save 18 seconds on a retrieval, it's meaningful. So, yeah, I mean, I was well over 50,000 a stall. But I'm doing this because any other project that I'm going to be developing the next 20 years, because I'm only about 30.
Let me just interrupt you for one
that
second.
I'm going to do this technology, yeah.
Before, the $50,000 a stall, that's not that much if you're building a subterranean parking structure,
Right, but
which
I'm
is
above
exactly,
ground, right.
but that's what you would have had to have done to have gotten those extra stalls anyway.
But keep in mind, I just built land, right? I created land vertically to open up other opportunities at the campus. So I look at this as a long-term, you know, there's no return on investment in a sense, because I have other opportunities on the same campus. Much
And-
like you might have, Anna, when you look at
Yeah.
the whole Expo Park.
And then, Rob, you said that there is an incremental cost to build, to basically pre-retrofit, if you will, the parking structures for this adaptive reuse. About what would that be, percentage-wise? How much more percentage-wise would it cost to do that?
I'm sorry, Claire.
To basically,
Well, no, I think what you'll ultimately do is you will remove portions of this system, and then now
oh, no.
Okay.
I'm sorry, about when you said you would build a building that had maybe 6 stories of office.
What would
and
that
the-
premium be?
yeah.
Okay, yeah, got it, I'm sorry. You know, a parking structure, well, I'll get in trouble for this, but it would probably be about a 30 to 35% premium to a above-grade parking structure. Above grade, if it's below grade, the premium would be less, but at the same time, you know, people still
Harder,
want to rent windows.
Yeah.
They won't lie.
So maybe let me try and give an answer. So in our structures, which are below grade, where we went to the high bay. We went to a 13-foot high bay where we could fit 2 cars in. The standard was around 8.5 to 9 foot, right? But we could stack 2 cars in place. The cost differential between that was about 25%. So we got double the space for 25% of the cost.
But don't you have a labor issue then, getting that stacked car out?
I'm just talking about structural cost, right?
I know, but to operate that,
Right, so
I
I'm
think
not,
that's gotta be taken into consideration.
yeah, so I'm not,
Technology for the parker, right?
Yeah.
so, and to go back to, we haven't, we in the process of studying the cost for operations and cost, but stackers are obviously a lot less costly than robotic parking. I think you have robotic parking,
Correct.
right? So stackers right now are anywhere between, you know, at the low end, 5,000 a car, up to maybe 15,000 a car. Robotics could be double that, but costs are coming down, so the
And then you don't have
operational
the
aspects need to be
operational costs.
factored in.
But I think one other thing we've got to, look, we created a very boundary-filled world in life. And we worked here, and we lived here, and we played here, okay? And so we moved too many people too far, and then we loved our cars, okay? So what ends up happening, I mean, this notion that there's 12, 13 parking spaces per car, but the thing that's going to be great, we're going to mixed use almost everywhere, and we're going to mixed use because we're tired of getting in our damn cars and driving to here, to here, to here, to here. It's a weird concept, but we like to walk. And so when you start looking at downtown alone, and you start looking at the traditional CBD, and you realize at 8 o'clock, it's 90% vacant, all the parking spaces are. And the utilization of that, and I think that combined with rideshare and that efficiency and saying, wait a minute, I can maybe not park exactly where I want. I may have to park 2 or 3 blocks, but walk. But I can save a ton because, again, how do we up the
But you
utilization?
can also Uber. You still have that Uber, that ride sharing for that
Yeah,
last
and up the
mile,
utilization, and
for the
that's why
last
at
100
first,
yards.
we all freaked when we were looking at putting the football stadium downtown. And AG was, I think I can say this, was building 3,000 for a 72,000 seat stadium, 3,000 parking spaces, and everybody's like, oh, are you kidding me? But they actually did a study and said, do you realize, and I can't even remember the numbers now, but there's 30,000 parking spaces within an X distance in downtown, and because it's on Sunday and they're all empty, and this and that. And I think this notion that I have to have a parking space everywhere I go is a mind shift that we've just got to drop. And I don't know if you've seen, what's it called, the little scooters in Santa Monica.
The automated,
Bird.
yeah.
But Bert, I think stuff like that is really going to revolutionize our first and last mile, and this notion that 5 or 6 blocks, I'm going to just get on this little scooter and take off.
If I can, Rob, on the mixed use and on utilization, if you truly have office and retail or residential together, today I gave out 260 tokens for 200 spaces because not everyone shows up at the same time, and it's a mathematical equation. If you have office mates that are showing up from 9 to 5, but the residents are leaving between 7 and 9 and coming back, you're able to utilize. I mean, you don't park in the same spot, by the way, in our system. You're on a random spot every time.
How would you know?
Yeah, it's up in the system. Well, we made it see-through. But the point is that's how we see it, is that a mixed use is an ideal situation, and residential is fantastic, because you don't want 50 people leaving at the same time. When Barney Rubble pulls the whistle and everyone's leaving the plant, it's trouble, because you get it. But in a residential situation, there's a lingering. It's between 6 and 10 in the morning, and it really works well.
And the experiences is important. I mean, that customer service, as you mentioned, people want to feel like they can get out of there and not stuck behind, a massive line of cars or on the way in. So I think having parking systems that take into consideration all of that is important too.
And what we found when we had redeveloped the block downtown, there was a single spiral that took everybody up and down. And there were people who were on the 8th floor who added an additional, it was almost 30 minutes per person to their commute to get from the 8th floor down because there was no signalization on the street to let people get out of the garage. And so that was one of the first things from a property management standpoint we did was again, having to use the people, having to use the management because it was so poorly planned. So that was, those are some of those planning process, and that's one of those structures that we actually did try to figure out, can we pull out every other floor and connect to the office building and expand some of those office floors to bigger floors, and, that's a very viable opportunity, yep,
Can I do
yes,
a hard left?
yes, sir.
I think the biggest issue with parking isn't physical, and I think that's what everybody's struggling with, but I think it's much more mental, okay? And by that I'm saying, I'm gonna go a little crazy here, but we're trying to get our employees to live off-peak. And so we're basically saying, don't come at 8:30 and don't leave it for 5:30. Come and go any other time. We've created an on-peak world. And when you really sit down and think about it, somebody said, I'm gonna design a city. We're gonna call it Los Angeles. We're gonna have 3 million, whatever number you wanna use. And what we're gonna do is at noon, we're gonna tell everybody to stop. We're gonna tell everybody we gotta have 3 million seats for people to sit and eat lunch. Because this is smart. And then that's 1 meal a day that this lunch place gets us served, and then everybody goes back to work. And when you really think how we've pushed everything to these crazy peak times versus saying there's shifts, you should have an 11:30, a 12:30, and a 1:30 shift. The restaurants can make 3 times as much money. They can be much smaller. But what we've done is we've designed roads, energy plants, buildings, elevators, everything for peak load. And the reason the Olympics worked is we as the citizens of Los Angeles said, we'll live off-peak so that our guests can live on-peak.
Yep.
And I think what you're gonna see with rideshare and all this stuff is a mindset change.
So we have just a couple minutes. Any other questions?
I have one question. So, you mentioned the financiers are the challenge in the parking allotment. Do you see a difference in private money developments, or is it more risk potential and risk aversion? And then a two-part question to that.
I'd rather your dad answer
the-
that question.
I think any institutional capital provider, whether it's a bank in
Yeah.
traditional debt form or an insurance company in a traditional equity form, is extraordinarily risk adverse. And so I think if you're dealing with like a Mesa Capital, which is a privately held equity fund, you're going to have a whole lot more flexibility. Sorry, that was my timer. You have a whole lot more flexibility to, I think, to look at different financing. But traditional capital providers tend to be very risk adverse. Have you found that gap? Are you in that process now?
So institutional capital has way more regulation and boxes to check. I think private capital tends to be much more entrepreneurial and understanding of trends, etc.
So what happens in the near term with the developers who aren't thinking this way and the ones that are? Is it a big culling in the market? Is it, what's the
Some of them are going
this-
to be more profitable than
Yes, I think the smarter ones will put up a bond for rideshare. We'll definitely jump on valet. So let me ask the audience a question. Who thinks you'll actually be driving 5 years from today?
Wait, hold on. Let me
Oh.
clarify that. Driving myself
Yes.
or being in a car?
Majority of the time, what? Give it a
Yes.
little time.
Oh, I'm sorry.
The majority of the
Driving,
time.
I'm saying driving yourself,
The majority of the
the
time.
majority of the time. Okay, 10 years.
Maybe.
So does
I hardly
anybody,
do it now.
does anybody believe in 10 years that the majority of the time you'll be driving yourself? Okay?
Fine.
Oh, we got
And
one.
so-
We got two.
If you look at just this room, to me, what it says is, back to your question to the financier, if it's gonna take me 5 years to get this door open, for 5 years of parking, I'm figuring something out, right?
I have the second generation Tesla, and it drives me from San Diego to LA without
But
putting
you're
my
not
hands.
supposed to tell your wife
know.
that. Last question, then we have to, this is the last question?
Well, I mean, I think the thing about the financing's gotta be married to what Rob just said.
Yeah.
Outfits like Mesa are 5-year money. Outfits like B of A is 30-year money. So you gotta marry this business model to a different financing model with different credit enhancements, where the public sector's gotta play the game that they want. So my question is, Rob, does that fit the kind of people you talk to?
Yeah. But I think the mind shift, yes. But I think the real mind shift, again, I get back to, I know my kids, but how many of you, when you get in your car, say, wait a minute, where am I parking it? what's it cost to park, and sort of start thinking of these other costs that we take for granted, because we just jump in the car, right? And I know I've found myself, am I gonna be drinking? You know, you start to kind of go through your list, and you find all the reasons to go, I'm just gonna Uber, or Lyft, or whatever your thing. And so I think
Or
that
take
shift.
Expo back to Culver City like I'm gonna do.
Yeah, well,
And you can work in the car for now.
That's right. There you go.
And
So-
the policy needs to come along. I mean, the financing is a part of it, but the other part, the companion piece is what policies are out there to, you know, incentivize us to go faster.
The only thing I would challenge you on is that what I've seen in my employees, I have 25 employees, as they are gaining more income and all that kind of stuff, they want the picket fence. They're willing to live in Lancaster. They want a car. I tell them the gasoline's going to be part of your mortgage payment and your car payment, and they want that. And there is that upward mobility. And so I think that's pressure. And I know behavioral economics is part of it, and incentives are part of it. And I do believe, as someone said in another session earlier, is like more people are moving to the cities, et cetera. So
it's a socialization.
Yeah,
I mean,
but-
the single biggest issue for the elderly is loneliness. And so I think mobility of people living in different stages in their life. But I also think what will support, like the red car. The red car was actually built by developers to get you out to their developments, because everybody didn't have cars back then. What are the two biggest activities people will say they will do in the autonomous vehicle? The first one's work, and the second one's sleep. And so now I can live in Lancaster. I can climb in this autonomous vehicle, and I can sleep for however long it takes me. And so all of a sudden, distances won't matter.
right.
All right, so this is what happened on our phone call. We all just kept talking. All of a sudden, I was like, oh, we went over. So we've gone over. I apologize for that. But thank you all so much for being here, and thank you to our awesome panel.